Welcome to Rent Facts in this quick application guide where we are going to answer a question we commonly receive, and that question is, why does each property have two risk scores, the MSA and the USA score? So in this short video, I'm going to answer that question and tell you how to use each score in application correctly. So as you see on your screen, there are two scores on this risk report from Rent Facts. The first score being an MSA score, and the second score being a USA score. I'll begin by saying the scores are on a scale from 0 to 100. Before we dive into the details of the score, I want to back out and give some high-level analytical terms, but I want to present it in a way that I hopefully everybody can understand and interpret. When you look at algorithms and these scores and systems, there's different types of measurements that you can present information. One is called a relative and one is called an absolute. Let me give you a simple example. If I told you that I was 6 foot 4 inches, that would be an absolute measurement of my height. Now, if you had no idea of how long a foot or an inch was, that would be fairly useless information. So the fact that I told you I was 6 foot 4 would mean nothing to you because you don't know how long or a foot or an inch is. However, if I told you I was taller than you, that would be a relative comparison. Now you know how tall you are and that I'm taller than you, so you have a reference point. That's more of a relative measurement. So that's a simple way that hopefully I can relate the difference between absolute measurements and relative measurements. Now let me bring it back to what we're really looking at here. When we developed the risk index, we opted to use a relative basis so people could compare locations not only across their MSA, their city or metropolitan statistical area, MSA, where they reside, but also across the entire country. So the scores you see presented in front of you are relative scores where we are comparing one neighborhood as outlined by this blue boundary in this particular location called the census tract. We're comparing this neighborhood against all the neighborhoods in two different data samples. The first data sample is the metropolitan statistical area, or in this case, Boulder, Colorado, and the second is the USA, which would be all the census tracts across the United States. So for this particular location, we can see that this score is how this neighborhood compares against all the other neighborhoods in Boulder, and this score is how this neighborhood compares against all the neighborhoods in the USA. In this particular example, there's almost a 20-point differential. That this neighborhood in Boulder scores only a 35, but when I compare this neighborhood against all the neighborhoods in the USA, it scores a 58. Let me pull up another quick report to give a reference. Here, we've identified a location in Memphis, Tennessee. Again, the blue boundary outlines the census tract boundary of that defined neighborhood. This particular neighborhood scores a 35 when compared against all census tracts in the MSA of Memphis, Tennessee. But when we compare the census tract against all neighborhoods across the nation, it scores a 19. So let me pull the Boulder property back up. We can see that the Boulder location and the Memphis location have nearly identical MSA scores. That means those locations relative to their respective MSAs are scoring about the same. Where there's a large deviation is how the neighborhood in Memphis, which scored a 19 against all neighborhoods in the United States, and the neighborhood in Boulder scores a 58 compared to all neighborhoods in the United States. The reason behind this is quite simple. Let me use another very quick example. I may be the tallest person in my city. If that's the case, I may have a high score of I'm one of the taller. But when I compare myself against every other person in the United States, there may be a lot of other people taller than me. So by comparing different data size samples, my relative location or relative risk of that neighborhood varies. Now here's how you apply that. If I'm investing in Boulder, Colorado only, I'm going to focus on the MSA score. I'm going to be looking at neighborhoods as they compare against each other just within that MSA. However, if I'm investing or lending or managing properties across multiple cities, I have more interest in how those locations compare against each other across the USA data set. In this particular case, if I was presented with an opportunity to invest in this location in Boulder versus this location in Memphis, you can see that the risk associated with the Memphis property is much higher. It has a lower risk score, which is indicative of lower income stability. So this is a way that if you are investing across multiple markets, you have a comparable measuring stick to evaluate risk across several different markets or any locations in the USA. Conversely, if you're investing only within a certain MSA, you can use the MSA score to focus your efforts. I hope you find this video helpful in understanding the difference between the two scores and which score is best for the application and the problem you're looking to solve.